a recording then. Okay, so again, the topic today from New England Association of Chemistry Teachers is our monthly ChemChat is on soft skills. I am going to start things off. The format of these chats, for those of you that are new, is they're really basically that. They're a chat, they're an open roundtable. We don't have usually very formal presenters for things. I have put some things in a folder on Google Drive that I am going to put the link to because I want to jump this off. In our school, we use what are called the 4 C's. It's communication, critical thinking, collaboration, and creativity are supposed to be like the 4 big skills that all classes, all sports, all everybody is sort of focusing on what graduates should be like. And one of the things that I found useful was to have some reflective tools. We're not trying to assess these skills. I mean, how would you say whether a student was creative or not? But they are things that we're supposed to be sort of focusing on. Geez, this is what we're doing today, focuses a lot on creativity and provide time for students to discuss what it means to be creative and for them to reflect on those kinds of things. So I'm going to actually share my screen and show you what one of these things, I got too many things going on my screen. One of these things looks like. This is one I picked this one because I combined creative thinking with the next generation science skill of asking questions and defining problems, because the creativity thing that our school has tied in with a lot of those. So I thought that would be useful. I got this format from a professional development, and in all honesty, I cannot remember the person or place that shared it with you, but I thought it was kind of cool that we have standards for a lot of things. So here it's like a creative graduate demonstrates idea generation, idea design, refinement, openness, courage to explore, blah, 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 blah. But that's not what's really important at the student level. What's important is, what does that look like? So they suggested that you take any of those kinds of standards and you break them down, and that's this gray box in the middle here, into what does it look like? So for example, I can clearly define a compelling problem, investigation, or challenge in a manner that builds a framework for envisioning solutions, and other things like that. So they're broken down this way. And then to the left and the right, what students do when they're reflecting on these is they check off the things that, okay, I'm doing pretty well on this right now. And they could check that off on what I know or can do well. And they check it off on the right side. My next steps are, if that's something that they feel, man, I need to work on this. And then at the bottom, they would provide me a strategy or something that they plan to do to work on that. And I have these as, I actually have an online version. We use a program. Our platform is called Schoology. I mean, people have a dozen different platforms, but it provides like a quiz format that I could actually have them check off for each of these things. It's listed as a multiple choice. I do this all the time. I do it most of the time. I do it some of the time. I rarely do this. And once they've checked off all of those, at the bottom, there's a free write place where they could say, what do I plan to do to boost myself up on this? And I simply look at them as a reflective piece. At the end of every unit, I give kids about 3 or 4 choices of things to reflect on. If it's something that's really popular, I make sure that I bring it back again, because for some of these, it's really important that students be able to reflect multiple times on the same thing. If they're working on that, they want to come back and say, gee, I tried that and it failed, or I tried that and it worked, and now I'm doing whatever. I also have ones based on some general academic skills like test preparation, problem solving, writing CERs. I mean, there are a whole bunch of things. And I have ones that are specific to a particular unit, like nomenclature or stoichiometry, or in physics, it could be a particular graphing skill. And I give them, again, 3 or 4 choices and they reflect on them. I sometimes provide feedback on the reflection and sometimes not. It kind of depends upon, sometimes just acknowledging that this is something the kid's working on. Sometimes I feel that if I talk about it, it kind of downplays my listening. I say, sometimes I'll tell kids, I really haven't commented on these because I really want to focus on listening to you, not sharing back my thoughts. This is about your thoughts, not my thoughts. But they are a useful way. And sometimes it'll result in me, because of my online format allows me to compile their strategies or their thinking anonymously. I can create a list that I can then put up in class and say, a lot of kids were talking about, we had one on collaboration where people were talking about listening and talking skills, because that's something that I work on very deliberately in class. And there were some interesting things that came up on what does it mean to be a good listener. And we shared that in a 2 or 3 minute, 5 minute class discussion. So and I have shared with you these, and there's one of them in the folder that is actually, so I put a whole bunch of these out. Oops, wrong one. Soft skill examples. And one of them, the 4 C's, if people were curious about that. The rest of these are reflections. And then at the bottom is it shows you what it looks like in an online format as opposed to a paper format. The paper format, by the way, is deliberately designed to take up only half a piece of paper instead of a whole piece of paper, because.
Sorry, Sue. Looks like what you shared with us is not soft skills examples. You shared ideas October 14th.
Oh, sorry about that. Let me try this again. Soft skill examples. That is a classic Clemmer thing to do.
Well, we have most of what you were showing us. That's the good thing.
You could see it, you just couldn't access it. All right, let me go back to, where did my chat disappear to? My chat just disappeared. Love that. Here, how about if I stop sharing? There we go. Let's try this one. If somebody go look at that one and see if that's the right folder, that would help.
It says request access.
Why does it always change back on me? Like every time I make things. All right, access. Soft skills, examples, sharing.
And sometimes it's actually on us because I've got 3 emails open at once. So if it happens to try and go through an email that you haven't shared it with, it's not your fault.
All right, let me try this. I just saved that as a share with everybody. So now if I grab the link, let me try that one more time.
I can see it now.
Oh, you can see it now? Okay. It was a question of saving.
Yeah.
Those of us that started teaching before there were Xerox machines, let alone computers, When I was in high school, I was still using a slide rule. We didn't have calculators yet. So sometimes I have to give myself a break. Anyway, so that's, I don't want to talk at people a whole lot. I just wanted to blurt something out there and then ask people to either comment on that or share something else that they think is useful. So opening up the conversation.
I think we might need time to digest some of this.
Yeah. I will say that this is relatively new in my 40-year teaching career. When I started teaching, the mark of a good teacher was how well you taught. And that meant, you have brilliant lectures and you have amazing problem sets and so forth. And then somewhere around the first half of my teaching, I realized it's not about what I'm teaching. It's about what my students are learning, which is really different. And then I started looking at, well, how do I know what they know or what they're thinking? And I have discovered that asking them to reflect on their own thinking and then listening in to that by looking at what they're reflecting is actually really useful. I do give them a very nominal point grade for turning it in, because that does motivate some students to turn it in, but it's a really small percentage. So if they don't do it, it's not going to kill their grade, because I do want to make it internal. And the whole idea that you should be reflecting on who you are as a person and as a learner, I think is a lifelong skill. So at this point, I have some kids who religiously fill in all of these kinds of reflections and really do it thoughtfully. And I have some that blow it off, and that's okay, because, you know, it's free choice learning, not you must. Because if you must, then I think that defeats the whole purpose of soft skills.
I had just something, I guess, to share, if that's all right.
Go for it.
So this year we came back to in-person teaching from a year of being virtual, and we're of course having a huge incoming class of freshmen who haven't really been in person in a classroom for over a year, closer to 2 for a lot of them. And I found quickly that the students had like no stamina for focusing in class. Their exam situations were the worst I've ever seen. They can't pace themselves on exams. They have no idea how to study. It's pretty bad. And so I started doing some surveys, anonymous surveys in my class, just to ask, like, what are you doing to study? How can I help you? How could you do better? Things like that. And I think things like what you've shared will really help me be able to hone in on what is going on with them. I think they also don't really understand what we expect from them at this point. And so they're frustrated, you know. A lot of them approach the chemistry like, well, if I can solve the math problem, that's all that matters. And to an extent, yes, like I am definitely grading you on a math problem for a lot of things, but they really are struggling to see the big picture. And the other professors in my department who teach, like, so typically for our majors, they take biology and chemistry as a freshman. Then they go on to take like human anatomy and physiology and organic their second year. And our human A&P professor is seeing the same problem. Like, even though they had me in chemistry last year, they still get so just laser focused on like, I'm going to memorize how to solve this problem, that extrapolating to a bigger picture and like being able to apply knowledge, they just can't do it. So any ideas anyone has for how to actually get them to see a bigger picture and, you know, do some of these things like are in these reflections. Communicating is hard, especially my class is 60 plus students. So that's hard too.
I think one thing that we forget that is definitely related to this, that I'm really seeing this year, is suddenly these kids haven't had any extracurricular activities for almost 2 years. And now they're suddenly going back into the sports. They're suddenly going back into these extracurricular clubs and things, and they have not learned to actually balance their time. So my kids that were pretty much straight A kids last year are now falling into the B's and C's, and they're flipping out because they're doing the work, but they don't have enough time to really be able to internalize it, is what I'm really seeing a lot of, especially at the like grade 11, 12 level.
Oh, I definitely agree with that. At Springfield College, we're kind of known for sports and things like that. And 40% of our students are on a varsity sports team, and 70% play some kind of sports, whether it's just intramural or whatever. So the fact that these are college freshmen who have spent the last 2 years not having activities, not being able to see their friends, not having any freedom. And now they're let off a leash in a big way. Like time management, they have communicated with me even. They're aware that their time management is a problem. So we're working on that.
I'm even finding that giving them more than enough time isn't helping. So one of the things that I do with one of I use Albert.io system as an assignment. And what I actually do is I'll assign 140 questions for a month. And I'll say, you have to get 60 right. I don't care which 60. So that way, if a kid's struggling more, they have to do more than 60. If a kid's got it, they just do the 60 and they're done. A lot of kids are not getting it done, even though they've got a month to actually do it. If they just did 2 a day, they'd be done. Even something like that, they don't know how to break it up anymore. When previous years, I've gotten excellent AP scores by doing that. So I'm also understanding what you mean by that.
One of the conversations I had today with one of our Spanish teachers who was bemoaning the fact that they're not retaining information, which of course we're also seeing in chemistry and so forth. And one of the reminders we had is these kids are 12 to 18 months behind in mental development. So if you're teaching juniors in high school, you got to think freshmen. What are the executive function abilities of my freshmen? If you're teaching freshmen in college, they've got the executive function, time management, all of those self-regulation skills of a junior in high school. If you've got freshmen in high school, they're thinking like a 7th grader. And I find that sometimes when I'm really frustrated with the 9th time a kid says, I'm absent today, where should I look for stuff? And it's like, dude, it's on the same platform that everything is on every day for all of your teachers. I just have to remind myself they're thinking like a freshman, not a junior. And if I remind myself to change my expectations or the way in which I present things, just for that time, like time management, like maybe you have to sit down with them for 5 minutes. Test prep was a really popular when I put that on as a reflection for my seniors. Normally my seniors could care less about test prep. They figured it out. Well, my college prep physics kids, after the first test, and a lot of them had bombed it, chose test prep. And they're like, yeah, I'm not, and they're test prepping like a freshman are. And we actually took a couple minutes in class to talk about people's favorite strategies for preparing for tests. And normally I would only do that with my freshman, sophomore classes, but my senior classes were glued to that. It's like, oh, wow. Yeah, I think I could do that. Cause it was literally not, it was not something that was on their radar.
It's all the way up the ladder. And I see the same things at the university. Socially also, there's a huge problem. I'm a big believer in, I'm a lurker on Reddit, and there's a lot you can learn by just sort of lurking and listening to the conversation. So like a lot of the students from my university, they have their own little group, and they will sort of talk about different events on there. And so you can sort of get a sense of the tone. A lot of the students are lonely. They've been for a year or a year and a half socially isolated. Some of them came from small schools. Now they come to a new environment. They don't know how to mix in. And as was already mentioned, there aren't the clubs, the physical activities. Some of them are, physically in a dorm, they're still living at home. All of those things sort of exacerbate. So something I've been doing in my class, which the students really like, is we create a community by having discussion boards. And it might sound like a strange thing using discussion boards in this way. And I wish I could take credit for it, but I can't remember who the chemist was. But I had attended another chemist talk about this, and makes videos and uses them in teaching his organic chemistry class. But he intersperses all of these discussion boards on different topics. And so I started trying this. I started by having an introduce yourself, where I introduced myself told some interesting things about me. This last fall, in terms of the beginning of the semester, because the kids had done online before, and then for us at least, they were coming back in person. I asked them to share what were some of the things that worked for you in the online environment, what are some of the things that didn't work, and then we talked about how important it was to know all those different things that didn't work. And they benefited from seeing, oh, Sue, Sally, you know, they all have some of the similar characteristics, you know, oh, how do we do this? Before doing our first homework assignment, I created a post and let them talk about, so when are you going to start doing your homework? How are you going to go about doing your homework? Have you thought about working with other people? And so this sort of helped. There were a number of them who posted and said, I would really love to be part of a group, a study group. And, you know, how can we do this? So we have something called Teams. I'm sure Schoology does something similar, but so I was able to help them and put them in little teams so they could use the different internet resources that they are way better at than I am, and carry out their own little study groups. And then a week before the exam, I asked them, you know, hey, want to share about how you prepare for exams? What are some things that worked, didn't work? So those are some of the things that I found very helpful. After we had the posting about the exam, I asked, you know, are you guys in a good space? And that ended up turning out to be a useful conversation. How do you, you know, if you aren't in a good space, you know, who do you turn to? You know, are there ways that I can help? Are there other resources that you can think about? And that turned out to be super helpful for the kids. So just a thought, you know, one strategy you can try.
I like that. I had asked my kids how well prepared they felt they were for a test after the test. And what was really interesting is that, and that was a physics group, like a college prep level physics group. They felt that they had figured out how to study for the problems. They hadn't figured out how to study for the qualitative part, because my tests usually have a concept section. And because somebody earlier was talking about big picture, they know how to memorize a problem. They don't have to think about the big picture. So we had a conversation in class about and I added in some resources. I said, okay, so how do you study for the concepts, not you can memorize how to solve a problem. The other thing I do along that line is I'll often ask them to justify their answer qualitatively. If you find kids are memorizing a problem, but they're not thinking about the meaning of the problem, then I will ask them to justify, and it'll be like, oh yeah, well, and it could be something simple. It's like, okay, so in the problem, the person was slowing down, and that's why my acceleration ended up being negative. You know, it could be something that really simple, or if it's a more complex problem, you know, my honors level kids or my more advanced level kids are saying, okay, yeah, this is the amount of heat it should release into the environment. That's kind of reasonable because of A and B and C. So another way to get them thinking about getting them out of the weeds is to ask them to think about that. But I love the discussion. Do you ever use your discussion groups for like application kinds of things?
I'm not sure what you mean by application.
Like you've been talking, I'll give you an example. My kids are working on stoichiometry, and they've just been sort of introduced to the idea of limiting reagents. So I'm having them read about the iron hypothesis. And we're going to have a discussion on whether they think, you know, meddling with the oceans to change the carbon dioxide that is taken up, you know, is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? You know, why is that a controversial idea? It's a get out of the concept into the application question. And I wonder if you ever use your discussion boards for something that's not something within the classroom, but like an issue related to content.
Well, I'll say fundamentally, yeah, the whole class is analytical chem that I teach, but I haven't used the discussion boards. I was going to use RSS feeds because I had gone to NEACT and they had to talk about it, but that turned out to be too complicated for Pam. So a friend of mine told me she was doing something similar using Padlet. Mm-hmm. And so I started doing that on Padlet. So the students can find a paper they think is like really cool, or, you know, something they see in the newspaper, and then they share it and talk about it. And I forget which the specific board is, but oh gosh, I wish I could remember the name, but it's sort of like a bunch of blocks all side by side. But again, that was something someone else showed me how to do. But it was way simpler than trying to do the RSS feed.
Yeah, I agree. That looked really interesting, but it was too complicated. I use Padlets, and I'm just putting into the chat. If you're particularly, I think it even works all the way up to college level. Yeah. Paige Keeley is a former Maine middle school science teacher who then went on to become the head of the NSTA, and then is a consultant on things. She's written a series of books that are, she calls them probes, and she'll throw out a question, and it's a deceptively simple question. One of the ones she often uses in presentations is, if you put two mittens on a table and you put two thermometers on a table, and you put one inside a mitten and you leave one outside the mitten, just on the table doesn't change temperature. If you come back 24 hours later, will the thermometers read the same or not? And it's amazing how many kids right up through like seniors in honors level physics classes will tell you that the mitten inside, the thermometer inside the mitten is going to be warmer than the thermometer outside the mitten. But you can use, so she's got probes on this, on chemistry, biology, physics, all kinds of things. And a lot of them are scenarios. And sometimes what she'll do is give you then like four different kids, four different fake responses. And what you do is you say, I agree with Mel, or I agree with Donna because, and they make great Padlet discussions to start off a topic or to review a topic. And in fact, sometimes I'll post the same one once at the beginning of the unit and then once at the end of the unit. And I don't really, we just post them and say, gee, you know, 6 people agree with Patricia and 6 people agree with Cynthia. Let's come back to this after we've talked about it for a class or two. At which point the kids who thought that the thermometer inside the mitten, once you've talked about thermal transfer, you know, they realize, oh, geez, yeah. And then hopefully they'll dig at it. Well, why did I think that? Oh, because if a hand's in a mitten, the hand's is actually releasing, you know, heat is being transferred out into the mitten from the hand because your body's warmer than the mitten. And so that's why things warm up, but the thermometer isn't going to do that. So they're great ways of, if you want to move into something that aren't soft skills. And I have found that although a lot of them were written for middle school, they are just as effective at high school and lower college levels, because they are what she's doing is targeting those misconceptions that are so hard to move. And if you do them as just, well, let's post and see what people think, it's not a grade. It's less threatening, and kids will actually tell you what they really think, as opposed to what, oh, but, you know, Mel Gavinian wants me to say this because I know he's talked about that in class, and I still don't really believe him, but I'm going to answer that way because that's what he wants me to say. And so the probes can be really non-threatening, and therefore you find out how many of your kids still think that plants get their mass from the dirt, right, as opposed to from the carbon that's in the CO2 in the air. Even college freshmen will tell you, I think that was one that they did with like Harvard graduates, that they still think that the mass of a tree comes from the stuff that it's picking up from the dirt.
In the chat, I just put a link to what appears to be Uncovering Student Ideas, her page. And if you go down to the resources section, it actually has bits about the NSTA's Daily Do probes and a bundle of probes as well.
Yeah, she has like 5 or 6 books that are out that you can all find on Amazon, but she also now has a whole website, and you can include, I believe, Asia, that the website now lets you post your own creative, because I found that once you figure out how they work, you can write your own. I have a classic one I use every year on if you take a copper wire and you cut it in half, and then you take that half and you cut it in half, and then you keep going, does that process ever end? And it's amazing how many of my high school students who have dutifully learned that a half of a half of a half is a mathematical series that never ends, think that that applies to a piece of copper wire, because they're applying the mathematical model and they're not thinking about other issues, such as what happens if you get down to less than an atom of copper. Or at the college level, I had a whole group of my college professors are really cool, because they would say that the process ends much earlier than that, because what makes copper act as copper requires a collection of atoms. You know, the conductivity and the color and so forth of copper do not exist if you have a single atom of copper. So they had a different argument, but it was just again, I love Page-Keeley probes because you can, and I like things that kids can access at different levels of understanding and yet contribute to the conversation. And they're definitely like that.
I do love how she's now saying I'm available to come and do PD at schools. I have never, ever been to a PD that was actually run by a scientist.
Paige, I call her one of those people that will suck the oxygen out of a room. I always forget, I've known Paige for many years. I always forget how tiny she is, because Paige is a giant personality. She's actually like in a 5-foot package, but I never remember that when I don't meet Paige. She does excellent. She is somebody that does really, really good professional development. We were lucky enough that when we did a science leadership program for years in the state of Maine, she would come in and do that. But she is one of these people that, like, some people can write a good book, but they can't talk in person. If you could actually get Paige to come to PD, and she'll probably, I mean, she would come to Japan. She would hop on a plane in a second. She's also dynamic enough that she would make sense over Zoom if that's the way you can get her. I would say grab her. She is, she makes people think, but she does it in a non-confrontational way, and she's an awesome presenter. What else? I'm looking at the time. We're at like 4:45. If anybody came to this meeting and had something that they wanted to get off their chest or throw into the pile for other people to chew on, I would say, jump in. The water's fine.
One thing that I started doing before we even went online that still does really help is at the end of each unit in younger grades, I have them fill in a reflection form about their test. And the most important question to me is, even if I got it right now, what am I going to need to review for my final exam at the end? So it's actually making a very specific checklist for themselves. Those that do a really good job on the checklist for every unit throughout the year saves themselves hours of preparation. And the ones that actually utilize it, I tell them, make a copy of it, use it in your other classes, that's fine. But actually scaffolding how to make a study list is a really hard thing for them to grasp. So I find that that's one thing that does help.
I love that. I had a whole book of exit slips that I copied and then use. And one of my favorites in that is, what do I need to tuck away? And you could also do this on a short form. A guy that I really respected who teaches nonverbal communication says that you should never talk for more than 10 minutes without giving people a chance to digest. And it's like, boy, I break that rule all the time. But one of his favorites, and I use it all the time, is either turn and talk or walk and talk. So you've been giving a lecture on something, stop, and either have the kids turn to somebody next to them and share, what did I just learn that's a takeaway? Or what did I just learn that I don't get? You can alternate those. But in terms of the one that Asia was just talking about, I would say, you know, what did I just learn over the last 10 minutes that's a takeaway? Or if your kids are getting antsy, I make them get up and start milling around the room. And after about 45 seconds or a minute, you can kind of look at their shoulders. When are they starting to relax? I say freeze in place, turn around, find somebody to talk to, and do the same thing. And then if you're practicing listening skills, you say, okay, what did your partner just, can somebody share what they just heard from their partner that they really liked? Not what did I share that I liked, but what did my partner share? And that's the way you could do that same thing that you're talking about on a daily basis. And then hopefully you could then get to the point where at the end of the unit, they can think back and say, what do I have to put away? But I like that, Asia. I should probably do that on a more structured basis instead of now and then.
My most recent grade 11, like pre-AP group just did their fourth unit test. And I do a weird order. I've got stoichiometry in with electrochem, in with types of reactions all together. And they did not do well. This is probably the lowest score some of them have ever had in their lives. And they freaked out. So what I actually did, so the highest score was 87%. Lowest score was 34%. Go. And so what I did was, it's a class of 9, which is very manageable. I put them into groups of 3. And I gave them a blank sheet of paper, and I gave them their question sheet, but not their answer sheet. And I said, you need to come up with the answer key together for these questions in one period. But don't be afraid to ask for help. So what I actually did is I would jump from between group to group. There's 3 groups. And then I would actually correct their answer key as they were making it and say things like, that's too many sig figs, or you forgot to divide instead of multiply, or that type of thing. By doing that, they actually, first of all, learn from their mistakes. And then what I did is I gave a 10% bump to everybody's test grade. And it was the last class before the winter break. They actually really appreciated that. And they also took away a lot more from that than I think that they would have if I had just said, here's the answer key, here's your grade.
One of my favorite teachers who he's on an island right now, so he teaches all the science from 7 to 12. He had an interesting way of dealing with, he taught AP Environmental for many years, was a teacher, teacher trainer on that. And what he did with the multiple choice, the objective kinds of stuff, and I use this all the time now, is when you get it back, he would have the right answer marked. So instead of having the kids, like, to get credit, put down the right answer, he says that doesn't really change their thinking. He had them write down, what made you pick the wrong answer? And he found, and I agree, that if you can get kids to tune in to what got them thinking in the wrong direction, then the next time they see the question, they're more likely to head in a different direction. If all they're doing is trying to memorize the right answers, those misconceptions just stay put. But if they can articulate to themselves why the wrong answer was attractive, you have a better chance of moving them, particularly off of those really stubborn misconception kinds of things. If it's little things, and occasionally kids will tell me, I just blanked out. And it's like, dude, that's okay. That's why I just blanked out and went the wrong way. But there are times when they can really say, oh yeah, I wasn't thinking about conservation of mass, or I was thinking that, mass and moles were kind of the same thing. It's powerful. And I'm wondering if there's a way of adding that into their study guide, because I do the same thing for annotations. I make them annotate their problems. And one of the things I say is like, when you annotate a problem, put down the places where you always forget to do something. If you forget to look at your balanced equation to do the mole ratio in your stoichiometry, then write that down. Write down the places where you tend to go off the railroad tracks. That's what you need to remind yourself of. You know, it's like those irregular verbs that I used to hate in French because I could never remember them. And if I wrote down, like, don't forget, as opposed to remember, sometimes that was helpful. But I like the study group. It must be wonderful to have just 9.
I don't complain.
You know, a class can get too small. I once had a class of 4 because of residual scheduling, and that it was actually too small. They didn't have enough
3 groups ago it was 4. But the thing too is that I don't teach the same class twice in a day. I've got 6 preps. So it does change that.
Yeah.
She wanted to be the first Lutheran on the moon.
All right.
Hey, Jessica, you got your TV in the background. Can you mute yourself?
Thank you. We are at 4:55. I have used up way more than my airtime today as hostess. So I am muting myself at this point, and I want to hear from people that are burning to say something and haven't talked.
Well, I just want to add that in addition to having them write, like, why did I think that wrong answer was right? Like, what was I thinking and how to correct that? I also have them write, like, so how will I know if I saw a question like that again? How would I now be convinced to myself of how to think of the right answer? And I think that's helpful too, just like an add-on. Wanted to throw that out there.
Mm.
But all of this is important.
I believe it was this group back in October. Was it this group that did the flip video bit as well? Is that right? Anytime it's possible, especially with the older kids, to get them to do like their notes or whatever at home in a way that's structured is super helpful. I've been using a lot of Dan Farrow, I think his name is. He does, I've got the Brown LeMay book, and he basically does cliff notes of the entire chapter in about a 1-hour video on YouTube. And so I pre-print the notes and I send them home with the kids and say, if at all possible, do this before we start the unit. And then that way they've already been exposed to the vocabulary, they've already seen it, and they're actually interacting, they're actually writing something. I find that really, really helps. And yeah, the guided videos also does that, definitely. I like his a little better.
It's hard to get kids to experiment with note-taking. So I try to remember the weirdest methods I've seen. I had a roommate in college who had 2 notebooks for every class. And what she did before the test was to copy everything from one notebook into the other. I tried that once. I was like beating my head against the table. It didn't work for me, but it worked for her because she was sort of having a conversation in her head about what she'd been learning while she do it. It was a way of kind of like running the video of the several weeks through. And so I keep mentioning weird things like that to kids because they don't want to, you know, sometimes kids are really afraid of change, and something that hasn't worked for them for years, they're still going to do it. You know, they're still going to test that way. So if you can challenge them with some really weird ways to study, sometimes they'll come up with something that works for them. You know, saying it out loud to your dog. You know,
I'm lucky enough that a lot of my students speak other languages. So I actually say, can you transfer this and explain it to your mom in Korean?
I love it.
It's a great skill to have But a lot of time too, then it turns into, well, I don't get what that means. So they actually say the wrong thing. That's the part I can't check.
What I would do with my students more at the midterm or the final exams, I let them write down like notes that they could bring into the exam. And it would depend on the page or the length, depending upon their quality or the amount of time, whatever. And I would say, look, if you write it down, you will remember it. And it's not my words that you're writing down. They're your words that you learned from being in my class, doing the activities. So during the test or exam or final, whatever, since you wrote it down, you know where it is, and I'm going to allow you to use it, which took a lot of stress off of the kids. And every person's note card was different, which I was fine with.
If you're allowed to do that, great. I put in the chat earlier, I was told I'm not allowed to have them bring in anything individual.
And you have to work with the rules of your school. I do understand all that.
On the flip side of that, I think it's the converse of the same thing. One of my favorite ways to word a question is to tell them, please explain concept blank. And then you pick an age group that's like 3 years younger. Like, can you explain photosynthesis if they're a junior to an 8th grader? Right. Because that forces them to put the concept into simpler terms, not use, because they're great at using terms that they have no clue what mean, but they sound cool.
Right.
And I think that's the flip side of having your note cards in your own words. It's the same thing. If you don't, there are several ways of taking notes that I've shared with kids that involve like Frere squares or 3-column notes or whatever. And the point is, you're not taking the notes in the way that the author wrote them. You have to force the kids to, whether that's making a concept map or a Frere square or 3 columns or whatever, but force them to put things, to reorganize the knowledge, because they're not going to gain it unless they reorganize it. We know that.
Right.
Before we finish up today, we do have one coming up in February. I'm trying to look up the date for that because I can't remember. I'm going to go find that in 1 second. While I do that, what are some topics that you would really like to focus on? Or, sometimes we just have a free-for-all on ChemChats. We don't really have a major focus. But if there's something that people would really like to throw out on the table in February, let me look up the date for it while you think about that and share that out loud. The February ChemChat is also really early in February. It's the first week. It's the 3rd of February. And that's because I know a lot of schools have February breaks at some other point in February. And I figured, A, nobody wants to do a chat when they're on vacation. And B, the first week seemed pretty safe. So it's February 3rd if you want to save the date. Still going to be 4 to 5 p.m. on Eastern Standard Time. Are there topics that people would like me to throw out for February? Would note-taking and studying be something that people want to keep talking about? Or have we beat that horse?
I think that would work.
And maybe preempt it with a bit of having people bring, if they do have any resources of structured notes that are free to use, if they could bring those with or send them ahead so that there could just be part of that folder, I think that'd be useful.
I like it. I will post a folder. And I think the other way to frame this is you now have to kind of deal with the note-taking and test prep skills of kids that are 2 years younger than what you thought you were working with. And particularly for those of us that don't teach a huge grade span, that may mean techniques that you're not used to using because you didn't need to if you're further up the chain. So, you know, I always used to say that if I want to learn content, I go to teachers that teach somebody older. And if I want to learn how to teach, I talk to teachers that teach somebody younger. Because that was helpful for me. Okay, yeah. So the idea of note-taking, studying, you know, self-learning things, and I will set up a folder on Google Drive. I will make sure it's shared openly, that I'll put right with the invite. So you don't have to wait for the, it'll be on the posting, not on the invite, so that people that are thinking about joining can put it on the folder ahead of time. We can do that.
I'll just put out there, recently I've been watching YouTube videos. Students make a lot of them. And if you Google like note-taking and studying, it's really eye-opening. And there's some great apps that will sort of help support their note-taking. And there's some great videos that can like motivate students and me as a faculty member in terms of better note-taking.
I do also know that this year, especially, a number of my middle to upper level high school kids really love using their iPads to take notes.
Yes.
So if I can send them the PDF in advance and they can write all over it, they adore it. And I just haven't really seen that yet, but definitely that's coming through now.
We've been in iPad one-to-one school for 6-8 years. So yeah, our kids are all into, and yeah, I can send them a PDF. You can send them PowerPoint slides. You can send them anything, and they can. I love it in chemistry because you can draw structures, you can type, you can do math. You know, it's like having a piece of paper. If you use some, particularly if you use something like Notability or whatever, you know, there's a number of programs out there that'll let you do multimedia, so that it's the same as us old farts using a piece of paper and doing anything you want, only it's already there for you. I'm going to bring this to a close because it's 5:07 and I want to respect people's time. I thank everyone, those who came to just listen, those who came to talk. You make my month better. I mean, I host these chats because, not just because they're good for other people, but because all selfishness, they're good for me. So I will see you in February, or maybe we'll see you in March. I will also make a plug that this summer NEACT is hoping to have a live conference up at Bowdoin in Maine. We're very excited about that. Bowdoin's very excited to have us and is making it super cheap to have people there. It's on the coast of Maine in a beautiful location. So, ta-ta.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for getting up early in the morning, Asia.
Hey, the sun just came up. We're good.